Well, we all know our target is $100 billion at the farm gate by 2030. But in these past 12 months, with the offshore outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Indonesia, and now the presence of the Varroa mite in Australia, well, are those aspirations under threat? How do we stack up globally on biosecurity? And are we doing enough to safeguard our 2030 industry target, and particularly the producers who depend on it? I want to welcome to the stage with a big ovation, and come on up as I call you up, Dr. Samantha Allan, GM of Emergency Preparedness, Animal Health and Biosecurity. That's a long job title. Animal Health Australia. Sarah Corcoran, the CEO of Plant Health Australia. Welcome up. Ryan Higgs, co-founder and CEO of Onside. Danny Feuvre, we love Danny because he's a South Australian, CEO of Australian Honeybee Industry Council, and Andrew Henderson, principal of Agsecure. This is Biosecurity, how we're safeguarding our $100 billion industry target.
Hello, everyone. Assuming you can all hear me loud and clear, I want to thank you all for taking the opportunity out of what is a really amazing agenda to come and sit in on this session to talk about biosecurity, the role in safeguarding $100 billion, that ambition that we all share as an industry, but to provide you, I guess, with a little bit of context before we rip into our panel discussion. I want to embed a few ideas for you that might challenge your perception of the value of biosecurity to each and every one of us here today. And I want to put it to you that, in fact, all of our livelihoods are fundamentally underpinned by an effective and functioning biosecurity system. Further than that, the social and economic fabric of rural and regional Australia is underpinned by an effective and functioning biosecurity system. And the role that that system plays in the sustainability and prosperity of our national economy and ultimately our national security is completely underdone. And so in the context of that and the challenges that face our system, from having to deal with outworkings from geopolitical ructions on the other side of the world, all the way through to border activities and the on-ground impacts of things that affect producers every single day, we have a really fantastic panel here that are really well placed today to give us some unique perspectives on how that system's performing, where are the threats and opportunities. So first of all, I want to go to Sarah and Sam. From an Animal Health Australia and a Plant Health Australia perspective, you guys as individuals, but also your organisations play a really fundamental role in the system. I'd love you to start us off with how are you seeing the system holding up in the current context of threat? So maybe, Sarah, from your perspective first.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andy. Look, the system is significantly under pressure, and that is through cumulative impacts of incursions, and particularly in the plant biosecurity sector. We would experience approximately 40 incursions of plant pests each year in Australia, and that's an average, and that's probably a good year in the plant sector. So yes, a very busy space, and one that requires so much support around understanding what the hosts are, what the actual pests are, what their impacts are. And in the plant world at the moment, we're actually experiencing our own FMD response in the livestock of the plant world, and that is bees and Varroa destructor. And that is one of the largest responses in terms of a plant pest that Australia has ever mounted. And it's one that is progressing at the moment, but does require a longer-term funding arrangement for it to be successful. But yes, overall, the role of Animal Health Australia and Plant Health Australia in our national system is for us to make connected partnerships and to bring together government and industry to make shared decisions around what is best for agriculture in Australia and, of course, what is best for our economy and all of the benefits that come from having a strong biosecurity system.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sam?
Thanks, Andrew. I think in the livestock sector we're a little bit lucky because we don't face the volume of challenges that the plant sector face every single year. We're more in the preparedness space. And I think that Australia can be really proud of the investment we've made in biosecurity in the animal space up to now. And just to give you some examples, we've got some really important resources. We have the Emergency Animal Disease Response Agreement, or the EADRA, and that is an agreement between governments and industries about how we will pay for a really large emergency animal disease response. We've also got the AusVet plans, which are a series of pre-agreed national response strategies for a list of more than 50 diseases, exotic diseases that we would respond to if they arrived on our shores. We've also been tested, not to the extent of the plants, but we've successfully mounted responses against avian influenza several times in the past, and the most recent one was in 2020, which happened in Victoria in the middle of a COVID lockdown. So that was a huge challenge and also like a great success. And I hope people haven't forgotten back in 2008 when we had a very large outbreak of equine influenza which affected the eastern side of Australia, and people overseas were saying it couldn't be done, but we did eradicate that successfully as well. So I think that we've got quite a good foundation. But, and I hope we'll talk about it a little bit today, is that the risk environment that we're operating in has changed. When we think about these great resources that we've got, they were conceived 20 years ago and they're still good. But if we look at the risk environment that we're facing now in 2023 and compare it to 20 years ago, it's really different. And I think the time is right for us to review our arrangements, our investments, and hopefully look at how tech can help us to be more efficient.
Thanks, Sam. It's a salient point to touch on just the rates of incursions that we've experienced, and that these things are happening quite often. Biosecurity is really important to people who it's important to, but for the rest of the community, it generally gets forgotten in the absence of a FMD scare on our northern border or a COVID outbreak or what have you. But it's something that we're all dealing with every day, and a good example of that right now, Danny, for you in your industry is Varroa destructor, and we'd love to hear how things are going in the trenches.
Yeah, look, it's like Sarah said, it's the biggest plant pest response we've ever seen in the country. So it's a huge undertaking, and I'm very thankful it's in New South Wales with such a great department there to manage it. But look, it's really testing the system. It is time now to review it, I think. And particularly for us as industries, it's all around affordability and the funding and being able to pay for these responses, because it is a shared responsibility. We understand that. We've got to all contribute to it, not only financially, but on the ground and compliance and doing the right thing, and everyone's got to pitch in. But trying to find a solution to be able to sustainably fund these responses and the post-border surveillance moving forward is a really big challenge. Yep. It's a conversation that we've been having for a long time, but I think it's a conversation we need to really get serious about now.
Yeah, fantastic. So that brings me to Ryan. I mean, if there's any other country in the world that takes biosecurity or has as much to lose around biosecurity, it's New Zealand. With your background in tech, not only R&D innovation, but also implementation and commercialization deployment, we've had a conversation offline about how positive the investment environment is around that at the moment, which is fantastic. There was reported to be billions of dollars in the room the other night looking for a home, looking to deploy. From your perspective, where in the system do you think we'd get best bang for buck for those dollars?
Yeah, so I think when I look at technology in the biosecurity space, there is an enormous amount of innovation going on across the whole board, from sensing technology to biologicals to software to biotech. So the tools and the innovation are progressing very rapidly, and there's an enormous amount of investment going into it, like hundreds of millions of dollars. I was in California last week, and private investment is really pushing innovation. So I would be very encouraged in terms of the development of the toolkit for biosecurity, for sure. I think the thing that people often don't realize is just how connected the agri sector is. Like, it's unbelievably connected. There's an old saying that you're connected to everyone on Earth with just 6 steps. So in the deepest, darkest corner of the Earth, you're only 6 steps away from that person. And so when we look at our data, you're really, in the agri sector, you're really only 3 steps away. So if you're a farm, and you're really only 3 steps away from every other farm in the sector. And so I think because of the connectedness, that's why pests and diseases can spread so rapidly. And so the key thing really where you get bang for buck, given how rapid pests and diseases can spread is preparedness. So preparedness and investment in preparedness and readiness and early detection will give you the best bang for buck for sure, because the earlier you can get, you can figure out that something's going around, you have so many more options in terms of how to respond.
Fantastic. Yeah. Danny, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add into that, I think you're exactly right. Preparedness is where we need to focus our tech and develop our systems. With the Varroa incursion, once it happened, then we saw a lot of people with new tech coming, wanting to bring technology into the response, and it's too late. Like, we need that technology to be implemented, tried, true, and tested as a preparedness before our response. Can't be bringing it in once we have it and trying to reinvent the wheel and reshape things, because the systems just don't allow it. Yeah.
It's a good pickup. I mean, I think the tech world's often plagued by solutions around, wandering around the landscape for problems. And, we talk about funding, there simply aren't enough dollars to go around to go up those kind of dry gullies. But, Sarah, if I can come to you from a plant perspective, where do you need tech and innovation right now from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely in that preparedness space, as Ryan's touched on, and Danny as well. It's there's a thing called the invasion curve, and it's a lovely bell curve that shows what happens when there's the investment before something arrives, and then what the investment looks like after something arrives, and the numbers stack up. If you invest in preparedness and you utilise technology that allows you to detect things more accurately, more sensitively, more quickly, then prevention is better than cure, because the approach rate, and as you heard, I said we get approximately 40, some years it's higher, and they're actual incursions of things that we may do something about. That's not including the things that we don't do anything about. So yeah, as you've heard, there's just a volume of approach to our border, and if we can keep things offshore, and if that means even going further offshore internationally to prevent things arriving on product into Australia, then that's where that investment should go. And the SEBRA did a study a few years back around what the value of Australia's biosecurity system was, because it's a difficult thing to quantify, but they managed to describe what that looks like. And if Australia wasn't investing what we do at the moment in biosecurity, within 50 years' time we would be facing a $672 trillion bill in terms of what the impacts look like to our sectors and to our community and to our country. So currently the system is delivering around $314 billion worth of value. That is a significant return on investment, and as I said, I'm no economist, but I know a bargain when I see one.
It's a good point. There's a huge amount to lose, and few of us probably realise the enormity of it. There's a live debate going on at the moment around sustainable biosecurity funding and what that looks like. But we also know that having these conversations around where best to target investment is really, really important, because Minister Watt and his counterparts around all of the jurisdictions have to wander into their respective expenditure review committees and fight tooth and nail for funding for these types of resources in an environment where there are many, many other competing priorities across the economy who rightly deserve the scarce resources of government and industry as well. So understanding how we can best target that investment is really critical when we're making a case for more funding. So Sam, coming over to you with regard to tech and adoption, from your guys' perspective, what would you see as being the highest priorities in terms of where tech can play a role, innovation can play a role, and where that investment can best be deployed?
Oh, thanks, Andrew. Well, I don't think I could add anything to Sarah's very eloquent description of the costs and the benefits. So because this is evokeAG, I actually came with a wish list, and I've got some specific things on there. So I might share that with you. And yes, these are problems looking for answers. So hopefully there's some smart people here that might be able to help us. I think there's three main areas from the animal sector point of view where I think tech could help us to either target our limited resources or get the most use out of information and things that we already have. And so if I start with surveillance, I think that it would be great if we could get more data. I'm thinking about remote areas particularly. Our main, I suppose, area of concern now is shifted up to northern Australia. It used to be like borders and ports and freight coming in, but for animals, we're really concerned about these important diseases that are just in our near neighbours to the north. So there's challenges there in being able to get good surveillance data. We need it to be accurate. We'd like to get it faster. And then I think we also could improve the analysis tools that we have as well. We do have good models, which we use in peacetime, but some of the work that's come out of COVID shows that there are people developing models now that can be used in response, and decision support tools that can be used in response to give people more confidence, making big decisions with limited information. So I think surveillance is one thing. The next one, I think, is diagnostics as well. Yep. I think we've seen with COVID the proliferation of what we call point-of-care tests, like the RAT kits that we're all using. I think that what we should try and aim for Australia is, can we get locally produced? Can we have ones that we have, of information about the sensitivity and specificity? They may not be perfect, but at least if we know what their limits are, we can have more confidence in how they're used. And I think tests that are a little bit more robust so that they're able to be used in the field or in an office rather than in a really specialised lab, I think would help with speed of diagnosis and that kind of thing as well. And then my final thing on the wish list is vaccines. I think that if Australia could become self-sufficient for vaccine production in the future, that would be a great step forward. We've seen with COVID the rapid acceleration of the mRNA technology, and I think that holds huge promise for animal diseases, especially starting off with emergency response, but also having application for endemic diseases too. And one of the things that I suppose is very important for Australia is that any vaccine or any medicine product that we use has to meet our high standards. So if something is developed here, it can be made to Australian standards and we'd be self-sufficient. So that's my short wish list for evokeAG.
I love that list, and I endorse that list.
Thank you.
And another wish that I'd like to add to the list is the acceptance of industry captured data into the scheme of things, because at the moment the system relies on the government captured data to support our market access requirements. But as we've heard earlier and throughout the conference, there is just so much information out there, and if we can harness it and have it accepted, then we're already halfway.
Well, that's fantastic because, we touched on before solutions wandering around looking for problems. You've got 4 very specific problems there that are looking for solutions. So for tech providers out there in the audience and in Tech Alley and all that type of stuff, that's where there's a real fundamental need, and Sam and Sarah will be around all week to be able to talk further and at length about that. But Ryan, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think, when I listen to you, Sam, I agree, you're bang on. And I think those 3 aspects really tie together. So if you look at networks and how networks operate, essentially there's only really, the literature would say there's really only 2 or 3% of properties that if you monitored them constantly, you'd reduce the risk of a network widespread by about 90%. So that's how powerful surveillance can be. And then if you tie that together with the diagnostics you're talking about, I guess the analogy is a bit like testing the wastewater that governments did during COVID. So if you can understand where to put the surveillance and you have the diagnostics, you can just test the wastewater. And I think and then vaccines as well can block the network widespread. So those 3 components would dramatically reduce the potential effects of an incursion.
Danny, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just to expand a bit on what Sam was saying, and I think in my mind with getting tech into biosecurity, I think tech companies are also got to know where they're pitching it towards. So in my mind, you can split it sort of down to 3 different sectors. So you've got the surveillance, which is not necessarily having to be so rapid, but more about comprehensive data gathering and speedy reporting. But then you've got the response where there is an incursion, and that's got to be data that's collected that is defendable and can be used for proof of freedom. And then there's also the on-farm biosecurity as well. So those 3 areas, I think, are 3 different markets for those tech people to attract into. And I think for tech companies, they really need to understand what they're trying to achieve. It's just not just chasing biosecurity as a whole. It's the different segments of biosecurity that they need to focus on.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, Danny, with regard to the fight that's happening with Varroa right now, tech's playing a role. Obviously, we heard the Minister make some comments on that earlier in the day. But what would be helping you if you could have anything
Yeah, a magic wand that could get rid of Varroa mite would be great, yeah. Look, there's a lot of stuff. We're getting a lot of, in the start of the incursion, we're getting a lot of contacts from ag tech companies with solutions. What you need in a response, and that's why I'm trying to separate those different aspects of biosecurity. In a response, we need stuff that is tried, true and tested. It's defendable. It gives us data that's recognised by authorities, even by the World Animal Health Organization, so that we can use that data we're collecting towards a proof of freedom claim once we eradicate. And so we need that, but also with this particular response, because it is such a large response, it is really testing the system of the D and PHA and working with between industry and government. And so there's a lot of lessons that we're going to learn out of this, but trying to get that sustainability and funding and that funding agreement to make such a big response move forward is really hard. We're in a situation at the moment where we're chunking it out into small sections of fundings, which doesn't give us any continuity or confidence moving forward. So we've got to negotiate that, and those negotiations are tough. And we need to see more transparency in those negotiations, because there is a lot of backroom meetings and those sort of things where there's caucusing going on, and I think as industries we need to be part of all the conversations and make sure there is transparency in that decision making, and truly work as a team when you're moving in such a big response.
Yeah, okay, that's good. It's a real challenge. I mean, Sarah, you touched on increasingly concurrent crises, befalling us as a society. And Black Summer bushfires cost $5 billion. The flooding alone in southeast Australia at the end of last year in Q4 was estimated to cost the economy another $5 billion. So, the priorities are stacking up and they're stretching the rubber band. So, I guess how can we understand what the role of individuals is in the system, as well as institutions, as well as governments, because these negotiations are getting more complex. The tension is becoming greater. So how can we individually make a difference, as well as at an institutional and governmental level?
Gosh, how long have we got?
Big question.
So biosecurity is the only hazard. So we treat it as a hazard as we do natural disasters. It's the only hazard where we stop and say, have we got the money? Can we invest? Is it worthwhile? Whereas those other ones, and understandably because there's human lives at risk, aren't questioned. But you'll hear and will have heard the term shared responsibility, and there were people in the system more than 20 years ago that had a vision for what the future was going to look like, because they knew that the approach to our borders was going to increase significantly. The risk is like shifting sands. How do we keep up and understand where to target our efforts when we've got limited resources? But in shared responsibility, which can sometimes sound a little bit heavy, there also comes shared benefit. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier about the generational impacts of what we're seeing. The prophecy is fulfilling, where the approach at the border was, in the year 2025, was going to be much significantly higher. And I think it's been accelerated through our own pandemic that impacted humans, and that it shows that interconnectivity of, we have to break things into their sectors to sort of have the resources to deal with them, but everything's interconnected, and that One Health approach and understanding that if you do this here, it's going to impact there. Hence, the only way that we can manage it is by sharing that responsibility, because we're going to share the benefit that comes from it.
Yeah, fantastic. In a couple of minutes, we're going to come to questions from you guys, and we really want to encourage you to jump up and get onto one of the mics shortly and throw some questions at our panellists. But I mean, that goes to a very sobering thought, doesn't it? Human health is always going to take precedence over animal and plant health. And one of the concerns, fears that we have is an FMD type outbreak or some sort of scenario. At the same time, there's some sort of wild new COVID variant where resources, as limited as they might be, need to get focused on human health as a priority. That then begs the question is, who's going to come riding over the hill to save us all if our resources have been deployed elsewhere? We know that they're increasingly scarce. So, Sam, how do you sort of see the world in that context off the back of Sarah's comment?
Gosh, Andrew, that is hard, isn't it? Well, I guess we have to always accept that human life would have to take precedent, over anything else. And I guess, I suppose the question is, how do we, I don't know, how can we make a difference, or how can we contribute? And I think really that biosecurity starts with everybody, and it starts at home. And from Animal Health Australia's point of view, like we would love to see every property owner have a biosecurity plan, like a real one, not just something on the shelf that you dust off every so often if you get audited for LPA. If you can sort of see the value from it and be doing it every day, it really does matter. There was a study done a while ago, and I should have checked the figures, but I haven't got them in front of me, but we were looking at actions that happen along the process from the time of a virus arriving in the country to like the size of the actual response and the costs that would be to the economy and in Australia. And we found that the biggest difference was made if we could reduce the time from when the virus arrives to the time that the chief veterinary officer or the authorities are notified. And that's all stuff that happens on farm. So it really just means, looking at your animals, knowing what's normal, knowing who to ring if there's a problem. Have you got a government vet close? Is it a private vet? And I think we've got to try and build the trust with the farming community that, not to be afraid to report. You're doing something for the common benefit. You can't really hide a problem on a farm for very long. It's going to get out and it's going to be much worse. So I think if we can get people seeing value from biosecurity, it protects you against endemic diseases as well, like sheep lice or foot rot and stuff like that.
That's
Fantastic.
right.
So, look, the gap there, I just want to touch on the gap between identifying an incursion and containing the outbreak and the significant cost that can obviously, in the bee industry, we know about that. But Ryan, I'd love for you to tell us what we can be optimistic about with regard to the role of technology in that process.
Yeah, I think just a couple of examples just from talking to people out in the hall yesterday. One company I was talking to, they've got some technology looking at machine vision where, a farmer could take a photo if they were concerned about some clinical symptoms in an animal, which would give them an answer in terms of what the disease might be. Like that's happening right now. And so that can be in the hands of farmers. And, there's other applications like that. There's sensing technology that is basically sampling the air all the time and very quickly knows if there's an outbreak of something like powdery mildew. Like that technology is available commercially right now. So the technology is becoming available really rapidly. But I think the point you made, Sam, is ultimately if a farmer or producer is able to report that very rapidly, that nothing's going to have a bigger impact than that. And really, if they do that, they're really a hero because they've probably saved a couple of $1 billion.
Yep.
And we need to treat them as a hero as well.
100%.
Yeah.
So that's a cultural shift, Danny. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think there is a reluctance for people to necessarily report sometimes because they're fearful of the consequence.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we've also got to be conscious about that rather than riding over the hill, like you said, on the horse to try and control something. We do need to have that cultural shift and make sure that everyone understands the responsibilities, but also make sure that they know that the system will support them if they do find something on their farm or in their hives or wherever it might be, that they can take away that fear of reporting a new detection.
All right. Fantastic. I think we should go to
Got one up the top.
some questions, and we've got one. Is that number 4? Fire away.
Hi, my name's Bronwyn Darlington and I have a company called Agsecure, and we take technologies from space and medicine and apply them to livestock. So I'm a primary producer as well. And my question really relates to the understanding of what it takes and the costs that it takes to develop some of these scanning and screening technologies. And one of the barriers that we often face is that agriculture and livestock gets like the leftovers of research and tech development budgets, and yet we have the greatest to lose. And I just was picking up a bit on the comments about how we want the screening and surveillance technologies, and we know how to do this, but finding people to bridge that gap to the government to help that go to scale is a real problem. And so I guess I was trying to get some feedback on how emergent technologies from one part of our sector, or we're working with like space technologies and medical to bring to our sector, can get sort of take up and support to go to scale in Australia.
That's a good question. Who wants to tackle that one first?
I think it speaks to the sustainability of funding. At the moment, particularly in preparedness and surveillance, it's really funded by industries with some assistance from government. And industries are stretched, so they're really focused on just putting all their money into the surveillance actions themselves and not necessarily investing in that tech moving forward. And I think if we can review and relook and redesign that funding model and allow for exactly what you're saying, because 20 years ago when it was developed, those sort of needs for money for tech development, it wasn't there and it wasn't considered, where I think there is now, and that's got to be part of that discussion that we're having moving forward about how do we better fund our systems and allow for development of those novel technologies, and like I keep saying, the testing of those technologies so that we have confidence in them as well. And so it's got to be part of that discussion moving forward, I think.
Ryan, what are your thoughts from a New Zealand perspective?
I'll probably separate it into a couple of different parts. I think, to your point, Danny, I think the funding needs to be available at an operational level so that you can actually use the software or the technology or the, at an operational level. I mean, at an innovation and a development level, I think that's more the role of the private sector, and there's a lot of investors that would be more than willing to invest in technologies that were going to provide real value to customers. So I think the operational budget's really important, though.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Did Sam or Sarah, you guys want to add to that?
I really like Danny's point in that it's really hard to have development programs if you've only got funding for 12 months or 2 years. It's really hard to look ahead, and it's really hard to assemble great teams and keep them together as well. So I think it does come back to that sustainability of funding, so we can have proper programs where we develop things. We can test new technology and help startups to develop new things for us.
All right, thank you. It does beg the question, doesn't it? How do we, what do we need to do to become really specific about what our ask is when it comes to these funding priorities, so that we can arm ministers, decision makers, industry leaders with the information and the backup that they need to be able to go and make a really sound argument for dragging money out of, in some cases, consolidated revenue or industry pooled funds for R&D and tech and investment and so on and so forth. So, right, we've got number 3 over there.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to the panel. My name's Jacob Hurd, and I wear a few different hats across a few different industries. And my question is really around the time now is to plan. How do we ensure that what the decisions are made now don't sit on the shelf potentially for 10, 20 years, and they're continually updated so they're relevant? And I guess the second part is it possible, should we look to consolidate all of these different organisations where we can? I genuinely believe that regardless of the industry, beef, sheep, dairy, bees, there's a number of organisations from federal to state to private level. And when it comes to biosecurity, this stuff needs to happen pretty quickly, and processes can get in the way. Is there any way we can look to streamline it to ensure that an outbreak doesn't grow legs and take off before we have a decent chance to stop a potential biosecurity outbreak?
Thanks, Jacob. I think that's a great question for Sarah to start off with, with regard to the rate of detections that happen in the plant world, but then also the myriad of different organisations that you guys have to interact with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, because the way the system is established at the moment, it means that industry and government are the ones that fund it, and that is either through the statutory levies that are collected by the industries, sometimes matched, and of course taxpayers' money, the public-private benefit. So there really does need to be more equity in where the dollars are being sourced from. The idea of a biosecurity levy to create a war chest as such that we dip into, rather than having to scramble to find the funds and to make them into this patchwork quilt that keeps us moving along. But yeah, that assurance of what the dollars will look like so that we can invest. And there's a few key players missing in the system, and that is, of course, the supply chain businesses that bringing in a commodity. Of course, Australians love to shop online, so there is a significant volume of product coming in.
Would you go so far as to identify them as risk creators, and that in fact they might?
Oh, the old chestnut of whether you're a beneficiary or a risk creator. I think we're all beneficiaries, and therefore it comes back to that shared responsibility that we were talking about. It starts with you. Everyone has the ability to make a difference, and I think that needs national recognition that it's every Australian's responsibility. We have 25 million people. That's 50 million sets of eyes that can be on the watch.
That's a scary thought, isn't it? If we're all shopping online, that means each and every one of us are risk creators. Interesting. Okay, so we've gone to number 3 up the top.
Thank you. Jake Phillips, Angus, Australia. I just wanted to, I suppose, see what thoughts or is happening. We've spoken a fair bit about response, surveillance, but we've also heard a lot through this conference about resilient supply chains.
Yeah.
And my point is, how much work is actually happening about, if there was an incursion, about the rebuild?
Yeah.
So what actual plans could be in place to help whatever species it might be about a rebuild strategically, and so it actually helps farming families and businesses on the back end of an unfortunate incursion.
Thanks, Jake. That's a good question. Now, Sam, you're the obvious candidate for that question. However, I'm just going to cut to Danny, because how do you see the rebuild for your industry, given that what you're experiencing right now?
Yeah, look, we're probably lucky with Varroa. We were the last country in the world to have it, so our risk of export markets are still okay, so we're not going to rebuild that. For us, and I'll be really quick, is moving forward with the response, whichever way, if we're able to get rid of it or if we can't, it's going to be that jurisdictional restrictions, like that internal borders within Australia and the trade restrictions we have internally is a real problem for us, for our industry. We're very transient, move across many states for making honey and pollination, and the impacts by not allowing business continuity because you're trying to prevent the spread of a pest really has big and far-reaching impacts for our industry.
Okay, thank you. Now, Sam, before we wrap up.
Okay. Gosh, I think we always talk about the recovery as being an integral part of the response, and it is supposed to start at the same time as the response starts. Now, I think probably you're in agreement, Sarah, but Animal Health Australia, Plant Health Australia, I guess we're really focused on response, and we deal with departments of agriculture, and they're the responding agencies. Where the recovery will come from might be from other sectors of government and from non-government organisations. And I'd be honest, I think we haven't really been tested in the animal sector. When we did have the equine influenza, there was a lot of learnings about the impact to the horse industry. It was way much wider than we thought, than just horse owners. There were so many other supporting industries, even milliners that supplied the Melbourne Cup, because we thought the Melbourne Cup might not be going to run. These hat-making people, they went out of business. So I think it is a bit of an unknown, and we probably do need to do a lot more work in the area. I think it's recognised that it's needed, but we haven't really been tested.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's a sobering and salient point to finish on. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to have come before you today. I'd like to ask for a round of applause for our panellists who have provided their expert insights.